Welcome to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, a show dedicated to cybersecurity challenges, solutions, a journey together, not alone. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MSP 1337. I'm joined again this week by Chad Holstead of BKS Group. Chad, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Welcome. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so this isn't a topic that hasn't been covered, right? So we're going to talk again about, I would like to have said this was a vendor management conversation, but really we're kind of taking a step back. It's not really a control in the top 18, but to talk about vendor evaluation. We've seen some stuff come out of CompTIA around this. They've got a vendor, I don't remember the exact phrase for it. Oh, it's called the factors to consider when selecting a SaaS vendor. It's got some questions around what you might ask of a vendor who falls into this category. We've seen, with Mike Stewart and others on, if a vendor doesn't have MFA as a criteria or doesn't integrate via SSO, like those are deal breakers. And I think this conversation and some of the suggestions that you've made, this is less about the checklist and more about a better understanding of what are the risks to my organization as it pertains to using their product, not box checking, right? Like this isn't like, if I need this vendor's product, we'll figure out a way to make this work. This is really about understanding some of the things that you talked about, like from a governance standpoint, do we even need this tool?
Yep.
And then that got me thinking about some of the other pieces, which is like, tied to the evaluation of Control 17 in CIS, which is that incident response. And inside of incident response, you highlighted for me, gets into doing a business impact analysis, doing a risk profile. So I guess you could say that we were both looking for, doesn't somebody have a sheet that already does this for me? I mean, I think, was that kind of how the conversation started? Because I think it's worth sharing the story to help frame this up for people that are listening.
Yeah, and ultimately that's where it started is I had an employee that asked for approval for a piece of software to be installed on his computer. I asked him what this software does and why are we asking for approval. Turns out that I've actually approved this already and I just forgot about it and it was needing an update. So, but when I went down that thought process in my head, since I didn't remember approving it, that means that we didn't do good due diligence. We didn't do the risks. We didn't understand the point to the vendor, to our process.
Right.
Kind of thing. And now what that led me to ask questions about specifically to you and the team was I started out with risk assessment. Hey, this vendor does this. What are my risks? And I'm sorry, let me back up a half a step. This software does this. What are my risks? So I was down a rabbit hole of a software risk assessment kind of thing, right?
Right.
Does it save data? Where does it save data, et cetera, et cetera? Does it have MFA? Those kind of questions. What actually turns out was I was asking a lot closer to what you're talking about is the vendor analysis. Why do we need the vendor? What risks do we have by onboarding this vendor? And what mitigating factors are we putting into place if we have risks by onboarding this vendor? And
right.
Yeah, I asked you, we all don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? So we all ask somebody, like, is there something out there I can start with, kind of thing. We all are each other's AI, right?
Right. Yeah, let's go check ChatGTP will probably have a good answer for me. Let's go look there.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I was started with it. And you're correct. I went at that level of thinking about risk assessments, but in the end of the day, what I really need to do is come up with a process and a procedure for evaluation so that we understand what's out there.
Yeah, and I think correct me if I'm wrong. I said Control 17, which is incident response planning. Control 7 is continuous vulnerability management, which gets into business impact analysis. So, but the reality is that all of those things don't
All
matter
over the
because
place. Yep.
yeah, so CIS unfortunately doesn't spend a lot of time talking about the vendor evaluation from the perspective that we're talking about it today. They talk about it more of like you have this vendor, is it approved or not approved? Some things like that. And I think, and not to downplay the value there, but more of like I think we're starting to navigate a new, it's not a new space, but we're putting on different glasses, right? So like you mentioned this before, like 10 years ago everybody had admin rights, like we looked at everything through rose colored glasses because we had no, the impacts that we had seen to businesses were largely far away and seemed very unlikely to happen to any of us. But now what we're talking about is understanding, why do we need this vendor, product or service, the why. Like even a week ago, 2 weeks ago, we might not have asked a very good why question because everybody in our organization is going to ask for something that you're confident in their ask, that that's probably something that they need, or they wouldn't be working for you. But then it makes me think about like what you said. We take admin rights away and we use things like auto elevate or just in time IT, whatever it's called. But like
Mhm.
they used to be resistant to that, and now we're talking about like just even to talk about applications that we want to install, are we doing enough to mitigate those risks that might be tied to like, is this really the right approach to solving this problem or solving this challenge? And I think that's the part that's got me kind of head spinning, and which is why after you'd posted that in secure outcomes, I'm like, maybe we should talk about this on the show because I think this is largely what a lot of solution providers are dealing with, and that is how to recognize when we've essentially gone around our own process and procedures, or even are sort of like ignoring the policy that we thought was being enforced to solve a problem because we found an exception to the rule.
Yep. And this kind of highlighted that for me. I mean, the employee that has this question, he wasn't trying to go around stuff.
No,
He had a very specific problem with our current procedure, and he found a software that helped him get through that problem.
right,
Now, I part of my reasoning for having this thought process in my head is like, wait a minute, probably asked me for approval when I was in the middle of five other things. Like you said, go ask dad. He's watching the football game. He'll say yes.
right,
And now it's like, why didn't we evaluate our procedure
right.
kind of thing? Um, I don't know the answer to that. And now I have to go back and do that. But if I don't have a procedure documented, what can I ask him to come to me kind of thing? So this is really where I'm at right now. It's like, I need to document a procedure, a policy, something that says, if you want something, this is how you get it.
Sure. But I think there's a bigger challenge here. So I'm thinking about the ask. This ask is in, I don't want to say it was a selfish ask, but it was how to solve the inconvenience challenge. And for those listening, we're talking about trying to get a laptop to current Windows updates before we start putting the additional software on there. Because the last thing you want is to just start flooding your system with tickets because the machine is not up to date, right? I mean, we're getting into an area where we could have said, well, if only he would have used the flash drive with the golden image that we
Yep.
just maintain, because you can load those so quickly, right? But then you run into the whole like, now I'm missing all the drivers for this version of HP or Dell or whatever it is, and we all know how that goes. But I think what's interesting here is we all are dealing with those types of challenges, right? So what's the right way to do that? Like maybe that's even a question to ask, like we're trying to solve Windows updates. Is that tied to like needing to be able to do, third party software to remote to this? Because I think this gets into that, when you meet with staff and you start having the brainstorming, the ideas that are the creativity of, we've been doing this way for years, but it takes X amount of time. There's got to be a more efficient way of doing this. I think that's the real root of the question being asked to install this software was like, there's got to be a more efficient way of doing this, right? And I think that's where
Well, and I
that
think that
policy. Go
It
ahead.
is. And you're correct on that. The problem that we have is the culture that we have here. And we talked about this in a meeting this morning too. Um, as MSPs, as solution providers, we've always had that customer service, get the customer's computer back up and running and get them back into production, right? They don't want to be sitting there twiddling their thumbs. So what do? We bypass checklists. If there's a virus, we clean it and get it back to them. We don't actually slow down and call cybersecurity insurance company, do forensics analysis like we're supposed to all the time, right? We just wipe the computer, give it back to them. Um, this is the same scenario is
Sure.
instead of the team slowing down, like we need to build a culture. We built such a big culture in the MSP community of go fast, give the computer back to them in 30 minutes and you're on your way kind of thing,
Right.
right? And we need to now build a new culture in the MSP solution provider world of slow down. Call the experts
Pump the
first.
brakes.
Think about it a little bit. Yes, it's going to cost your customers some productivity. So you know what? Throw them a loaner laptop, something else, because we have to change that mentality. And that's what I'm struggling here with this specific incident. And it's not an incident issue, is
Example.
example. Yeah, let's not use those words.
Yes.
But the employee wanted to get something done, needs to get it done in a timely manner for the customer, has a workaround. Whether or not it really is approved workaround is to be said yet.
Sure.
And slowing down and actually thinking about it instead of working your instead of setting the expectation of the customer up here, he needs to bring the expectation of the customer down a little bit. And that's a culture thing, not necessarily even. I mean, you can't push that via policy. You can only enforce
Well,
it with you.
so it's funny. So I have a workshop that I'm doing in April at MSP Community Minds, and it's how to select the right security stack. And it's part of a workshop that Matt Lee from PAX 8 and I have both presented together. We've done it separately, but we're now at a point where if one can't make it, the other one can, then we'll just swap out who's presenting and get it done. And what's important about the exercise in the workshop is it's all about the what and the why before you start deciding the how and the tools that will deliver on this. And I think in your case, the approach wasn't necessarily wrong, but it's one that could have been on a more collaborative conversation. Go, wait a second. We don't want to just solve this for a one-off. We want to solve this for always and forever because this is crazy. Like I do not the efficiency waste here of trying to, solve it in the one-off is like, well, what are we doing next time? Picking up the
Yep.
next free or paid tool to solve this. And I think that's where the challenge is, right? Like we always say, or I should say we, the initiative for the taxonomy of safeguards on that tool side is where does it fit? So is it facilitating, addressing a safeguard or your policy? Maybe you could say, does it facilitate supporting the policy? Does it validate or verify the things that are in the policy? Like, is it one of those automated collectors that can give you evidence to say, yes, you are doing these things? Or does it partially or fully facilitate the safeguard? And I think that's where we start to see the challenges and what you're trying to accomplish is if the scope isn't defined well enough for what you're trying to accomplish, then you're always going to have things like this that are kind of a one-off because we haven't given the intent or the time to go, we need to solve this, not put another band-aid on it.
Correct.
And that's vendor
And
evaluation, right? Like, is that not what we're evaluating vendors on? Like, what is it that you're going to do for me? What is it that you're going to solve for me? And is this a temporary solution or is it a permanent solution to my current challenge?
yes, 100%. And at the end of the day, the guys just it's a frustration from them because it's like, wait a minute, I just want to do this and get on with my life. And it's like, but you're not solving the problem. You're making us more inefficient than efficient. And you just can't throw tools at it and expect everything to work anymore. We used to be able to. It's a different world that we live in now, and you can't do it that way anymore.
Right. Um, so if we were to try and solve this today, like what is it that you're looking for? Because the conversation started with you kind of posting in the Secure Outcomes Teams channel and saying, "Hey, does anybody have an answer to this?" Because this is way bigger than a checklist. This is getting into things like you mentioned business impact analysis. You mentioned, sort of a risk strategy for like critical infrastructure versus, some of the more, like operational versus and fill in the blank.
Yeah. Like, is my coding software mission critical compared to my RMM? Does do those two have the same risk? Right? Do I care if my coding software has MFA turned on? Probably not.
Right.
Do I care if my RMM software has MFA? Yeah, I do. Right?
You
Because
might
there's
want it in your sales or your quoting software because you might have enough information in there that might be valuable to somebody besides you.
there. Okay,
But
but
to your
to
point, to your
yes,
point,
the information is valuable to me, not valuable to the world in general. Right?
right, but that's part of the
But
process, right? Like perceived, like this is one of the things that you have this conversation all the time. I know you do with your clients because we talk about it on a lot of our calls. Getting a client to recognize that they do have something that's important to somebody. Like, so if we're doing, like how long can you not be able to run payroll? How long? Like a day, 30 days? Like as long as my bad things happen between the 2nd and the 18th, everything's fine because we do payroll, between the 20, whatever, right? Like those start to change some of those things. But the reality is, well, what happens if you're just separated from your data?
yeah, and I agree. But you still don't necessarily have. Not every single one of our vendors is an RMM vendor who,
No,
God forbid, if they got through the RMM, they can hack our customers.
but I
Right?
think that's the question that's really being asked here is if I'm evaluating vendors, they fall into different categories. And whether or not the data that they store is sensitive or not at this level of engagement, it's identifying what are we willing to allow coming into our organization from a vendor. Can it have access to sensitive data? Does it have the ability to touch, client infrastructure? Like there's like a list that's probably not very long, but it's very specific around how it impacts critical infrastructure and operational technology as it pertains to staff.
Correct. And that's where I started my question this morning. Right? It was, how do I come up with this list of questions that
Yeah,
basically are conditional access questions. If this, then that, then this, then that equals this, right?
sure.
Kind of thing. And coming up with that list of questions, then you're right. I'm thinking you're probably looking at a total list of questions of maybe 10, 15,
Right.
but each 10 or 15 probably have two or three underneath it. If yes, then, you have these other three things. Um, I was looking for that list of questions. What I truly believe is it's not just a list of questions, it's also the why. It really those questions don't ask her the why. And that's the one question that I haven't gotten an answer from my team.
Right.
Right. So writing the questions in a form of a process, we also talked about change management on our call this morning. One of the change management questions that you ask is what is it changing? What is it fixing?
Yeah.
What is it resolving? Right? Yes, that's a what, but same process is why. Why are you doing this? What is it changing? What is it resolving for you to do this kind of thing?
So
And
I
that's what we did. We failed to do here, and we failed to do it quite often, to be honest with you. So
So I recently have spent quality time going through the new NIST CSF 2.0 safeguards. And interestingly enough, the conversation we're talking about today is actually a section in the new 2.0. So it talks about establishing third-party risk management or cybersecurity supply chain risk management. So the safeguards talk about things like set up and align supply chain risk management program strategy, objective, policies, and processes with the agreement of stakeholders, right? So like in your particular case, there really wasn't necessarily a stakeholder buy-in to this. It was more of the knee-jerk reaction, ask dad because mom said no. But then you get into things like how do you evaluate? So identify and prioritize suppliers based on criticality. So like we've seen this in CIS, like your third party inventory, right? Your software inventory, your service management inventory. Are those categorized? Because when we think about evaluating a new vendor, what category is that vendor in? What's the impact to your business if this thing goes squirrely or sideways? And we could talk about that vendor specifically on another, not on another episode, but like not when we're recording. And we could talk through what are the challenges that are faced there because we see like so if we identify based on criticality, then we have to get into like what's the potential impact to our business and some of the other things that go along with that. And what's interesting is NIST CSF 2.0 goes on to say like what are the best practices for each one of their governance safeguards around supply chain risk, and that is exactly what we're talking about right now, right? That is a different approach to the service vendor management that's found in CIS. They're talking about more of the you're already using this vendor. The supply chain risk management piece that's talked about in NIST CSF2 is talking about the supply chain. Where does this vendor that you're thinking about using fit? Because if you have it in the wrong place and something goes sideways, the business impact is potentially a really big impact.
Catastrophic. Exactly.
Yeah,
Um, and that's exactly this conversation is the software that he was asking for does give him access to remote systems. And if that vendor, because we didn't do any of our due diligence on that vendor, we put them in the wrong box.
right. So we can
And I
obviously
mean,
spend all day talking about frameworks and ways to go about tackling this. But, as I was thinking through and kind of hearing you talk through the challenge and what was sort of the, mom versus dad and it got executed, it's like, when was the last time you did a supply chain review for critical vendors with regards to your organization? We were talking about this before, right? Like you've got your RMM tools, you got your PSA, you got your quoting tools. They all fit into similar or different categories depending on what it is. But this is kind of like pen testing, right? Like it has to be reviewed on a frequency. And it made me think of like Charles Love from Showtech when he's like, no, we evaluate vendors. This is the window. Otherwise, we're not changing nothing, right? And can just thinking about that statement in the context of this request, hey, it's March. We don't evaluate new vendors until October. Sorry. That's the answer.
that's exactly it. Um, but it's less about, so for me right now, I'm boiling all of this conversation that I've had in my head since last night, that I've talked about since this morning. It's ending up to coming down to two things for me. One is that I have a culture here, good, bad, or indifferent, that has
Get it
allowed this in the
done.
past, right? Just get it done,
Yeah. Yep.
right?
You and every other MSP.
100%. But now we're in a different world, and the culture has to change to a slow down culture. And the only way to really enforce that slow down culture is to reevaluate and put policies and procedures in black and white on paper so everybody understands what the policy, then call it a checklist, call it what you want.
Sure.
I don't care.
Well,
Right?
I mean, we talk about onboarding and offboarding with employees. Like, what's the strategy for when this project that this tool was needed for is done? What's the strategy on what we do with that tool now? Is it
Yep.
being uninstalled? Like, I mean, we all remember the C cleaner and malware bytes from back in the day when lots of us used the free editions, and basically the limitation was you had to manually update them, right? That was the limitation. And only to discover things like I know with like C Cleaner, the one that happened back, I think it was in 2018. Yes, free tool. It was auto updating, and it was auto updating to the malware edition because they had had a SQL injection that changed
Yep.
the executable. that was patching, and the reason we didn't see a widespread disaster is because they were only targeting very specific entities. So they sent their payload out everywhere, but they were only looking for a certain kind of fish.
Yep.
So this is
And
that
that's
same kind of challenge, right? Because we've said yes to the tool for good, bad, or otherwise. But is this something that ends up in we only have one person that uses it? I've forgotten who it is, and we don't have anything in place to uh, have a like post conclusion to the usage of this where we sit down and say, okay, what did we learn from using this tool? Do we need to keep it? Do we need to invest in buying the premium edition or whatever it might be? Like, I
very well
think
could
that's one
be.
of the biggest challenges we have in our industry.
Yeah. Because we are all running so thin, so lean, and so fast, kind of thing.
Well, and
And
it's a catch 22 because, as gas prices go up, as an example, do we drive less? Not necessarily, but you become more conscious when it crosses a certain threshold and starts to impact quality of life. And I think the same is true on a more um, bigger scale when we look at like, okay, we're going to add this other thing to, Acme Corporation and, $2 per endpoint per 25 endpoints times 12 months, all of a sudden it's like, wow, how many other things do you have to layer in here before you start charging me more and more money? And it's like, well, the cost of doing business is going up. So while I may have to change my prices to you, you may have to change your prices to your clients too.
yeah, and it's I, I don't really like the good old days of just, go, 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 go. But there's a part of me that says, you know what? If you could take today's backup pro, because let's face it, 10, 15 years ago, our biggest problem was we had to restore a crashed hard drive, right?
Right.
If you can take today's
Yeah.
backup technology, which really works a lot better than it used to,
Yeah.
get rid of today's cybersecurity problems and go back to yesterday, I would do that all day
We
long.
all would, I think. Like, I just want to swap hard drives out again. Like, just take me back to, I can go to Fry's, I can get a box of hard drives for less than a
Yep.
laptop. Yeah, I'm good to go. I mean, we have seen this in the screen space for laptops, break a screen, replace a screen. That's pretty, uh, but like this really, I mean, the more I think about it, the more I'm starting to go, wait a second. The whole life cycle management of vendors from
That's exactly
inception to conclusion has got to get baked into the governance of it. Literally, this has to get embedded in your culture. So, like, I
it
don't
has
say cybersecurity is culture or culture has to be cybersecurity, but embedding things like vendor lifecycle management and the reasons behind that need to be owned by every employee in your organization.
100%. And I think at my office, we do a really good job of doing security first, security forward thought,
Right.
right?
You're including security in the conversation that it is being
Yep.
considered for everything that you're doing, as opposed to it's a byproduct or, you give it a second thought, maybe if you're lucky.
But the
But that's not
texts,
culture, right? Like that's
no, it's
not
not.
culture.
It's text still
That's
want to
that's
be
just
told to
rules.
go.
That you do as I
Yeah.
say or else, right? I don't care if you talk to dad.
Yeah. And that's basically what kind of we got to get a little bit better on here at this point. So,
And quite honestly, we could look at this through a different lens. Let's look at it through the lens of all of the things that led to this conversation weren't wrong, right? Like we're solving he needed a solution to a problem. He's trying to improve the efficiencies of the way in which you prep endpoints for the end user. But I would say, from a maturity standpoint, what you haven't put in place is how do we discuss this post project close? The end user now has their laptop. What was the takeaway from this? Is this a tool that needs to be part of our core, what we use every day? All engineers are going to have access to this resource. Is it, hey, it was really good on these three things, it lacked in these five. We need to reevaluate because this is going to happen again. I think that's where the real challenge comes into play is that you're not closing the loop on the reason for having this tool in the first place. I think that's where if I was doing an evaluation on BKS, if I was assessing you against the safeguards and the security controls that you want in your organization, the maturity I don't think was violated here. I don't think you've done a like you're going in the wrong direction. I think this is a opportunity for maturity because you haven't had something in place here yet. And
That's exactly.
the maturity is evident because you're saying, hey, I recognize that what we're doing, while it solved the problem, isn't the right way to go about doing this if we want to scale this to something else.
No, you're 100% correct. And it's like there's, if you look at this, we're trying to go down this Trustmark CIS framework path,
Right.
right? One, then two, then three, then four, then five, then six, and then go backwards to two, three, four because you forgot something, right? We're
Right.
constantly doing this backwards and forwards kind of dance. I just happened to wake up last night and go, we got something wrong here. Jumped all the way to Trill 15, right, which is solution provider management. Looked into it a little bit. It's like, okay, I need to do something like that. And
Right.
then develop a culture and a maturity. And then on that same point, you have to do a postpartum, right? A postmortem, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
You have to conclude that this is, we used it, we're done with it until the next thing happens and we need it again. But the reality is, need it again may never happen. So we need to make sure that we conclude having this installed somewhere where it can become a problem later.
and that's it. I cannot guarantee that this agent has been uninstalled from that user's laptop. And now I will bring that up and I'll do a network scan and I'll see if I can find it. And hopefully he has removed it like he promised. But it's got to be, we still have to do that postmortem to verify that it has been removed. And that's
Yeah.
the maturity level of BKS that we're not there yet.
Well,
So, and we're
and
getting,
I would argue that this is one of those areas where you can have the best of intentions, and this one's still hard to get right. It's still going to take time to build this out. And because the reality is, you don't want to frustrate the engineers, right? Like you want them to be productive, you want them to look forward to coming to work in the morning. The last thing you want is like, well, if I try to solve this problem, I know Chad's going to shut me down because this hasn't gone through the life cycle approval process yet, and this won't happen for 6 more months, which means I'm going to be doing this manually until then. But the flip side is, and I think to your point, if we put something in place that creates structure around it, so at least you can track it, you're more than halfway there, right? Because the reality is, if you can track this, then you have something that you can review, even if it's not tied to this, like you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't, right? Like that's not the model we want. And I don't think cybersecurity is that either, because as soon as cybersecurity starts to uh, uh, impede the ability for you to do your job or to support a client, then security starts to compromise security.
correct. You're 100% because at that point, you're going to bypass security all day long to get your job done, kind of deal.
Simplicity, complexity. And I think the reality would be this is probably a pretty simple life cycle management for vendors. We're not talking about the details of SLAs and contracts and 2 year,
No.
3 year terms. We're just talking about the usage of the tool.
Yep. And just for lack of a better term, transparency to the company as a whole. Because if Chris is the only one that
Perfect.
has this tool and Chris leaves BKS, does that leave a hole in my the company as a whole doesn't know about
Right.
this tool? I don't know what to do with it.
Well, we
Right.
saw this in education, and it was one of my like, it was a deal breaker for me. So when we were evaluating software for in the classroom, get aside the privacy and student stuff for a minute, a teacher would say, "This is a great tool, allows me to do all of these things, and I can track progress for the student." And so the question that would get asked is like, okay, and when that student goes to the next grade level, how does that data transition with that student for the next teacher? Oh, it doesn't. Okay, then we're not using it. Because if it's a one-off, even if it's paid, I don't care because we are removing the ability for this to have any sort of long-term positive with those students. Because if you can't measure it after the one window, is it working? I don't know. It worked for
Yeah,
90
exactly. It
days.
made Chris's life easier for
Yeah.
6 months, right? But
So
now Jane's gonna have
it's
so
the greater good, right? It's the equality, and if it's missing, then there's problems. And not even that. If you think about, like, let's just say this is a great tool and everybody should be using it. Is the tool accessible for one user, or is it accessible by the organization? Like, do you buy licenses? Is it something that can be centrally managed? Like, now we're back to going down this checklist of how do we evaluate whether or not we should use this product. And I think at the end of the day, for what you've shared with me. I believe that in this case, to solve a problem, there's probably nothing wrong with the execution that was followed to do this, but the post-mortem has to happen because now you're like, okay, we've tried it. We understand the value of doing this. Is that the right tool?
And that's exactly it. Or, okay, guys, we took a breath. We got past this little hurdle. Now, can somebody please call Datto and find out why we can't do this in the tool we already paid for?
Exactly. Or fill in
Right?
the blank, right?
Exactly.
All right. Well,
So
now my head's spinning. So, any last thoughts on this, Chad? Because I think I don't want to say we've exhausted it. Obviously, we could do a whole discussion on vendor lifecycle management, but well, I
I
guess I would
think
just ask this question: did this help?
it did.
Okay.
And I still need to go down the rabbit hole of building that list of questions. If
Yep.
critical, do you and access to data? Do you have MFA? Do you have a SOC 2? Do you have
Yeah.
this? If the answers to any of those are no, it's a deal breaker. You can't install it, kind of thing.
Or it's a we need to reevaluate how important this tool is. What is it? Is it a one of a kind? Are you saving me, 45 minutes per endpoint instead of, five? Like, what are we really solving with this tool? Because I think sometimes we accept risks because of the efficiency that it creates. But I think it's having those conversations of being willing to draw a line in the sand. I think that just shows the maturity process at its finest, which is that it's continuing to improve.
And that's exactly where I'm at. I'm going to have some conversations internally here, write up some SOPs, and then
Yeah.
how many tools does every MSP have? I know our security stack is 10 tools deep.
I'm
I
gonna
got to go
say
back
it's
and do
probably
this.
between 75 and 100. Let's just be honest. And even if it's not on every machine.
Yep. So I got to go back through and I got to do vendor due diligence,
Yep,
75 to 100 vendors,
that's
which is
right.
fine. That's fine. Got to go do it. But now I got to ask the
I
questions.
would suggest before you do that is figure out what are the categories that vendors that you work with live in, so that
100%.
when you
Yeah.
go through that list, you're not doing it five times.
No. And that's the same question. Is this like you talked about the guy that fills up the water tank in the basement,
Yeah,
right? Does he have access to customer data? He is a non-critical vendor.
yeah,
All you got to do is, do we have his ACH information? Yes. Done.
right.
Data RMM. Okay, we need a little bit more details on data
Yeah, we're
RMM.
not trying to solve for incidental exposure in this, right? We're trying to ensure that they don't have the means to be malicious and cause problems.
That's exactly it. So
All right, Chad, I
that's
think we've exhausted this one.
I think so too.
All right. For everybody listening, thanks and have a great week.